I'm Bob Sewell. I'm a lawyer. In fact, I'm a partner at the law firm at Davis, Miles, McGuire, Gardner. I started this podcast because my clients always ask me, is that even legal? I want to discuss on this podcast how the law affects us and changes our daily lives. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope it is meaningful to you, and I hope you learn from it. Thank you. Today's guest in the podcast is Spencer Schiefer. Spencer Schiefer is a certified family law specialist here in Arizona, which makes him among the most experienced and the most tested of family law attorneys in Arizona. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bob, for having me.
Spencer, you are incredibly experienced in family law. When I went and I searched your name on the docket in the Court of Appeals, I found many appeals, and more than your average attorney generally, and I would imagine probably more than most, if not many family law attorneys. And so, you come with a lot of credibility in my mind on family law. That's what I wanted to have you on to talk about, is family law. One of the weird things about the law is we like to make things complex, right?
Yes, we do.
And nothing's straightforward. You think it's all straightforward, but nothing's straightforward. And one of the things that should be straightforward, but's not, is how you know who your daddy is. So today we're going to talk about who's your daddy.
Yeah, you think it's black and white, but life is full of gray area, and that's where the law comes in. Sort that gray area out.
So let's just jump right into it. Let me give you a fact scenario, and then I want you to tell me if you could tell me who the daddy is,
yeah.
Okay? And how we're going to find out. So let's just say, and this is to the families out there listening, this is going to be a little bit more PG-13 of a conversation. So
okay, I'll pull it back.
Let's say that there's a woman out there and she has multiple partners, okay?
Yep.
And by multiple sexual partners,
yep.
And she conceives a child, and the child is born, and she picks one. Well, I don't know who it is, but Frank, he's a great guy, and I pick Frank. She doesn't know. She hasn't tested. Who's the daddy?
Yeah, good question. So, in the absence of a DNA test, what a couple can do is they can sign what's called an acknowledgement of paternity. And it's basically a document that you get, sometimes they'll hand it out at the hospital. You can go down to Office of Vital Records and get it. And in a nutshell, the mother and supposed father sign this document saying, he's the guy, he's the father. And they sign it, and it gets witnessed, and then if they file it with the hospital or Office of Vital Records, or even with the court if you want, it becomes just like a court judgment saying, this is the father. So in the absence of a paternity test, that's something that a couple can do. Once that happens, he's the daddy. That's the guy, even if he's not the biological father. So they sign this document, and under Arizona law, he becomes the father. And that gets.
But Spencer, that kind of pisses me off. I'm going to be honest with you, because that could be ripe with all sorts of challenges and fraudulent activity and trickery, really. Because what if daddy, the real daddy, doesn't know?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so biological fathers, they have some hoops they got to jump through. And if they want to actually be the dad, they have to do some things to really assert their rights. To your point about the trickery, that's absolutely true. And there was a case that came out about 5 years ago. I know it well because it was my case. And it was with someone else at the firm when I wasn't working there. And that's what the court said. They said, okay, if you sign this document and you do it fraudulently, you both know that this guy's not the dad, but you do it anyways, then there's no time limit as to when they can undo that. So they're not going to reward people for a fraudulent act. However, the question comes into play where, in your scenario, she has mom has multiple partners, and she just doesn't know. never gets a DNA test and truly doesn't know, but thinks, hey, I think it's this guy. This is the one who I've been with the most maybe, and I think it's this guy, so let's do it, and we're going to make him the father. In that scenario where they don't know, and they're doing it, say, ignorantly, but they truly believe that he's the father, then the question becomes, okay, biological father's over here, and he comes in, what can he do about it? Can he undo this? The answer is yes, but he's got a really limited window. So under the law, the couple that says, yeah, this is the father, and they sign this document, the acknowledgement of paternity, they have a 60-day window to say, you know what, I changed my mind. Like, I thought he was the dad, but he's not, or I thought I was the dad, I think I'm not. They got 60 days to rescind, to take it back. Other than that, the other guy, the biological father, let's say he comes in and he proves with the DNA test, hey, I'm really the father, not this guy that you said was the father. He's got 6 months from when that acknowledgement of paternity was signed and filed to undo it. After 6 months, too late.
Again, that's ruthless. I mean, think about this for a second. This, you don't have to really get extreme in the examples here to really see how unfair this could be. Let's say that the mother has 2 partners, just like we said, or more, whatever it is, and knows that it's a crapshoot on who it is, who the daddy is, and then says, okay, I'm picking Frank, I'm picking Bill, whatever reason, whatever quality, this is the guy, this is going to be the best father for me as a mother, this is who I'm picking, and she ghosts the other men. Mm-hmm. She just pushes them off. They don't know she's pregnant. They don't know that she's given birth. She just ghosts them. How is that fair?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I think one of the main underlying principles that the court cares about is stability and permanency for the child. So the way I think they view it is, I think the court recognizes that it can have an unfair result on biological fathers, but they put above that the best interests of the child, and they're basically saying after so much time passes, 6 months, and in a lot of these cases more time goes by, years. They say we're not going to disrupt this child's quote unquote family unit or who this child knows or believes to be his or her father because this guy's late to the game, even if he may be the father. So they put above a biological father's desire, want, interest in being the father. They put above that the child's best interest. So that's it. Definitely can seem unfair, but they're trying to do it for what's best for the child. So in a scenario like that, though, one of the things that people can do, what biological fathers can do, is they really need to file a lawsuit. It sounds kind of extreme and maybe something like in the movies, but that's really what they need to do. If they think that they are going to have a child with someone that they've had intercourse with, at the end of the day, they need to file a paternity action. And you can do that even when the mother is pregnant. You don't have to wait till the child's born. And that's probably the ideal time to do it, because you can always do it as a placeholder and say, okay, once mom gives birth, we're going to do a DNA test and find out for sure. And if I am, great, move forward. If not, lawsuit's over and you're done.
Let's change the facts, okay? Just a woman has more than one partner. One is her husband. The other is the biological father. And the child is born while they're still married. Who's the daddy?
Yeah, really good question. So under the law, presumptively, the husband's the father. So there's this Arizona statute that says if you're married and you have a child, presumptively, the husband is the father. There is some case law on it. It's not completely great in my opinion, but there is some case law on it where it does provide an opportunity for the biological father to try to come in and assert his rights. But it's really difficult, and it's kind of on the underlying principle of the law prefers to protect a married family unit and disincentivizes other men from having intercourse with married women.
Okay.
So it makes it harder for them to claim the child of a woman who's married. So in a roundabout way, it disincentivizes that type of social thing. But
again, that's not his. I guess it is his fault that he decided to have relationships with a married woman. But he's being denied a relationship with his child.
Yeah, and that's something where the law, in a lot of ways, constructs our social policy, what we believe in, what we think is important, and that's one of the areas where, yeah, on the one hand, it hinders his ability to father his biological child, but on the flip side, it's disincentivizing him to put himself in that position in the first place.
So I knew someone, and I came across, and they asked me for my counsel years and years ago, and it was this situation. The woman has multiple partners, picks the one finds out she's pregnant, picks the one that she thinks is going to be the better father, and says, "All right, you're it. I'm pregnant. It's your baby." Turns out it wasn't. It was someone else. Years later, he finds out, and he feels absolutely betrayed that this was not his child, and he probably didn't have a very strong instinct for fatherhood anyways, and he ends up wanting to sever the relationship with the child. And my counsel to him was, what are you doing? It's not about you.
Yeah.
This is about the kid. And I think that's where you're going here, is that this is about the kid. You lose your rights as adults when you decide to, do things that harms children, right?
Yeah.
And my response was, don't throw this relationship away. This is a perfectly fine relationship. It doesn't really matter. Engage, be dad. It's not satisfying for people when these things happen. But again, it's not about the adults; it's about the kids.
Yeah, and in that scenario, I think I would agree with you as far as the advice you gave him on a social, personal level, and legally, for context, and so the audience understands. In that scenario, he can't get out of it. He couldn't sever that relationship legally anyways.
So he wasn't the daddy, but he's the daddy.
Yeah. If they agree, so going back to that acknowledgement of paternity I was talking about, you got 60 days. And after that 60 days, there's a 6-month window for, fraud or mistake of fact kind of thing. But after that runs, you can't get out of it. And there's 2 established cases where that really make that clear. The 2 parties that sign it, the mom and the supposed father, once that window closes, there's no getting out of it.
But what if the father that signs, what if he finds out within 6 months of signing the affidavit that he's not the daddy?
Yeah, so if he finds out and he files it's basically a motion to set it aside. He files that within the 6-month window. He could get out of it. So let's say he claims that the mom defrauded him. Maybe she presented him a false DNA test, or maybe she assured him that he was the only partner that she had, or whatever. Or maybe he took a DNA test and showed that he's not the father. Those are things that he could use to say that there was a fraud or there was a mistake of fact, and I want to get out of this. And that's possible in that small window.
When it comes to adoption, it's not clear who your daddy is for quite some time. And there was a recent case in the Court of Appeals I saw. It came out, I think, it was this year. It came out July of this year, the opinion. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, the facts, no matter which way you turn. And tell me about the case. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. It's Cox v. Ponce. Ponce is the Superior Court judge they were challenging. It actually just came out for the Arizona Supreme Court. So it was on a Court of Appeals, and then it went up to the Supreme Court.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it just came out. I know it well. My former partners actually were on the case, and fortunately for them, they won. So I know the case well. Here's the nutshell version of it. Mom and biological father have a child together. They were not married, and then she wanted to give the child up for adoption, and so she went down that process. Part of that process under the law is she has to notify the dad, or who she thinks is the dad, that she's going to give the child up for adoption, which she did. Under the statute, that guy has a limited window of 30 days to file a paternity action to establish his paternity rights to the child and serve that on the mom. He had a lawyer, and they didn't file on time. They filed, I think it was 16 days late, his paternity action. So when that came out at the trial court level, the mom and the adoptive family, they said, well, it's too late. You had 30 days, you missed it. We can move forward with the adoption. And then the father, of course, is saying, no. I was barely late, just over 2 weeks. Give me a break. And so they went round and round. Went up to the Court of Appeals, now the Supreme Court. Interestingly, so at the end of the day,
let me before we get to the punchline, the opinion here, the holding. It's 16 days, right?
Yep.
And the child will be, the child of whichever person the judge chooses to be the parent. He or she will be the child for his entire life. It's a relationship that's going to last decades, and so 16 days just it feels like nothing in the lifetime of the child.
Yeah, and that's I believe that's strongly the argument that the dad was putting forward is, and my recollection is that this child was very young, so I think the mom put the child up for adoption almost right away. So we're talking about a baby, right? So 16 days is nothing in the 18 years of this child's life until it becomes an adult.
Right, and 30 days is, man, that's a short period of time. I mean, 30 days really, how many things have we procrastinated for more than 30 days, right?
Yeah.
And especially in today's day and age of sexual politics where they may have not even had a strong connection of a relationship when she became pregnant and conceived and bore the child. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he may not have had a lot of contact with mom during this process. And so 30 days may have been a really short period of time for the guy.
Yeah, and not just for him, but for all biological fathers, right? I mean, it's a very short window. And so the question that was presented in front of the Supreme Court was, can this be excused in a sense under, equitable principles, under, what we would say what's fair, right? Can we toll this deadline? Can we extend this deadline, just a little bit because as an excuse, like you're late to school and you have a really good excuse and it's okay.
Let's say that I have some job that takes me away and, I'm a merchant marine, I don't know, and I get served with this notice and I'm like, okay, and I'm not a lawyer, right? And I get on the boat and I'm out at sea and there's nothing I can do about it. For the next 3 months, I'm screwed. Right?
Yeah, you got to get some legal help. You got to get boots on the ground to do something for you there.
Tell me what the Supreme Court said.
Yeah, so the analysis came down to whether or not the Supreme Court was going to view this 30-day window as what's known as a statute of limitation. Some people may have heard that. That's kind of like a legal deadline of when you have to do something, otherwise it's too late. Or what's a lesser-known thing, a statute of repose, which is kind of like a end-all, be-all, final deadline, no extensions kind of thing. There was one case in Indiana that they kind of glommed onto and analogized from, and ultimately the Supreme Court said this is a statute of repose, and because it's a statute of repose, equitable defenses, equitable principles don't apply. So they couldn't do anything under the name of equity or fairness to extend this 30-day window. So 16 days was too late. There's nothing they could do. The biological father cannot assert his paternity rights, and the child's going to get adopted by this adoptive family.
That's brutal.
It is brutal. And when you read it and you understand the facts and you realize that this guy, he wanted to be the dad, he filed something, he was, a couple weeks late, and now he doesn't get to be the dad, it sounds super harsh. On the flip side, because this is something I'm familiar with and I do a lot, I look at everything on kind of both sides of the coin. On the flip side, I understand where the court was coming from, because if you say, okay, we're going to make an exception, we're going to, say it's 2 weeks late, and we're going to use, equitable principles, fairness to go beyond this. Then the question becomes, where does it end? This case was 2 weeks. But if you give judges that power, it basically becomes a subjective power. And then you have judges all across the state who say, okay, well, this guy was only a month late. It's not a big deal. I mean, barely anything. Or this guy was 6 months late. Yeah, that's a long time, but he's the dad. Let him be the dad. Okay, he was a year late. All right, but the child's only 2. The child's got a lot of life. He's the dad. Let him be the dad. Where does it end, right? So I think that was an underlying concern that the court had of, if we make an exception here and there's no exception written in the law, then the exception can overcome the rule. And then that defeats kind of what I talked about earlier, the underlying principle that the courts have of creating stability and permanency for the child. So what they don't want to do is to have children who are ready, willing, and able to be adopted, have an adoptive family there, and then put that in limbo and jeopardize that based on a guy who's going to be who knows how late. This scenario is heartbreaking, but the next guy might be a year late to the show.
Or 2 years late.
Right. And so they had to draw a hard line, and unfortunately, it didn't work out for this guy.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I get the hard line, and I think we could always go back to the state legislature and say, hey, 30 days is not enough, or somehow change the rule. But on the other hand, can you imagine how brutal that would be for the adoptive parents, right? You're taking care of a child, and anyone who's cared for a child knows the late nights and knows that, and the diaper changing and the feedings and just the amount of energy you put in.
You're going to give me PTSD.
Yeah.
I have 3 kids. It's all coming back to me.
So, you put in the joy and the pain and the love and the bonding that takes place, and then some interloper who has been around for 2 years says, I want to come back in.
Yeah.
That's brutal on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I've had cases, and I've been on both sides of the issue, and it's tough. It's a situation where someone's going to get really hurt.
I want to change the subject from finding out who your daddy is in the law to finding a way to make your daddy pay, okay?
Yeah.
So, because that's not always clear throughout the United States is who pays.
Yeah.
She's pregnant. She's going through all the pains of pregnancy, which anyone who has ever had a spouse or significant other do that knows that there's a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of challenges to bring that baby into the world. And then that's it, right? That's the extent of his contribution wasn't much, and now it's, now he really doesn't want to pay for what just happened the past 10 months, 9 months previous, right?
Yep.
Can I make him pay?
You can, yeah. And every state has its own laws. Obviously, once the child's born, you can establish child support. Here in Arizona, you can get birthing costs, or at least half of the birthing costs. But that's about it. So you can get child support, date of birth going forward, and then half the birthing costs.
And birthing costs means just what took place in that room, right? I mean, what the birthing room.
Yeah, my understanding and recollection is it's really limited to out of pocket, right?
Utah recently passed a law. They wanted to go one step further, and they said you had to pay half of all the costs of bringing that child into the world, and including half of the health insurance. What do we think of that?
Yeah, I saw that. So kind of going back to what I said earlier about how the law, in a way, shapes what we value socially, right? And kind of the law that disincentivizes a guy from having a relationship with a married woman. This disincentivizes, I think financially, people from maybe having premarital sex. Or at least having a child, or at least it's going to put a huge financial burden on men that wasn't previously in place if they do get a woman pregnant. And I understand it from this aspect of, from the woman's side, being a single mother is one of the most, difficult things, socioeconomically, to raise a child and probably working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. And a lot of the cost goes into bringing that child into the world. So I get where they're coming from, but it is a rude awakening, I think, for a lot of guys.
But do we really feel bad for them? I don't feel 1 ounce of pity for them, because otherwise their partner would be paying it all, and he would be just off scot-free. I don't have any pity. Is it a good policy? I think it's a good policy. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think it's a good policy. As an argument I just made in front of the Court of Appeals, actions have consequences. And this action has a consequence. And if you get someone pregnant, then it's going to have some cost to help that pregnancy go through. And why shouldn't you be contributing to that? So, yeah, I'm on board with it. And I don't see why just the mom would be financially responsible for the entire 9 months of pregnancy. So I'm totally on board with it. Some dads may not be.
Spencer, thanks for coming in and talking about who your daddy is, because in the law, as I said before, in the law, who your daddy is may not be so clear. And so you cleared it up a lot. If I wanted to get a hold of you, not me personally, but if one of our listeners wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so they can give me a call at the law firm. Main line's 480-733-6800. Or my email address, I'm happy to give it. It's Schiefer, it's my last name, SCHIEFER @davismiles.com.
Again, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, thank you for listening. This has been the podcast, Is That Even Legal? A discussion of what's legal. Just as a reminder, this is not legal advice for you. This is general information. It's meant to be educational. If you have specific legal needs, don't be afraid to reach out to an attorney to get good legal advice. Attorneys are lovable. They're fun. They want to hear from you. See you next time.